Hello everyone, my name is Tyler Dawson, and today I will be talking about the Lost Cause myth. Now, for those who don't know what the Lost Cause myth, it was a belief system incited by ex-Confederate soldiers and supporters following the American Civil War and had its earliest roots during the Civil War. Now, the main concept of the Lost Cause myth was effectively trying to separate the reason why they were fighting, which was for slavery, to something that wasn't. There's something that could garnish international and national support. One of the easiest and earliest concepts of this was to garnish foreign intervention in the Civil War on the side of the Confederacy. Now, these support would have most likely come from Britain and France because their governments weren't at the time very pro-American. They considered America to be kind of a fragile state, and with the Civil War, their supply of cotton, which was vital to their economy, kind of came to a screeching halt. So their governments wanted to intervene. However, it made it very difficult to intervene on their side for two reasons. One, both the populace of both Britain and France were very pro-Union. They saw the Union as the legitimate government. They saw the Confederacy as kind of like a rebellious state that needed to put down, and thus they weren't very keen on intervening on the side against the Union. The second part to that was they couldn't fight for a side that was supporting slavery, which is where the early stages of the Lost Cause myth was, because both their nations had abolished slavery, and if they entered on the side for a nation that was fighting to preserve it, it would kind of go against what their own people want, and thus it would have created their own their own problems within their own country, which would have been pretty detrimental to their way of life in their country and would have probably incited their own civil wars. So they ended up not doing it. The reason I bring this up is because a lot of people ask me that the Confederacy didn't fight for slavery, but rather for state rights, which at the time owning slaves was. However, that was the main point for secession and the early foundations of the Lost Cause myth. The reason why it's a big problem nowadays, because a lot of people view the Civil War and the Confederacy through a modern lens. And what I mean by that is the way they live, the way we live, the way we view things. So obviously in today's time, the ideal of fighting to preserve the right to own another person is completely far-fetched and out of the realm of possibility. That's where the issues come in, because people are viewing the past through the present, which you can't do that. Ultimately, doing that, you won't grab the concept of why the South really want to fight or the reason for fighting. Though it was a horrid and a horrible practice of that slavery was, it was what was seen as culturally acceptable at the time. And if you're going to learn and review history, you have to review it that way. You can't look at it through the modern lens that we have today. You have to put yourselves in the shoes of someone in the 1850s and 60s and put yourself in their perspective and their belief system. Only then are you going to actually understand history for what it is. And I know that's going to be difficult for some people because that goes against everything they believe in, including myself, but it's just something you have to do. Now, the next part of the Lost Cause myth was to heroize and demonize the Union and heroize the Confederacy. Now, there's a movie called Generals and something. I don't remember the exact title of it, but it came out, I think, in 2014 and was very much a neo-Confederate propaganda film. It portrayed leaders like Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee, and a bunch of other Confederate officers of men of the people, men that would sit out in camp in tents with their men, and they were like heroes of the South, and that they were just these great, awesome people. Though they did have some accomplishments, they were more or less, and they were not men of the people. 95% of all Confederate generals were aristocrats that were part of the planter class, which owned slaves. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson did not own slaves, but he heavily supported the racial segregation. So portraying them as men of the people like we would with modern generals and modern war heroes or even Union heroes is completely false. They could not give two damns about the common man. They were only fighting this war for their bottom line because they knew if they lost the slaves, they were going to lose a huge chunk of their wealth, and that's ultimately what they were fighting for, was to preserve their bottom dollar. So when people talk about the Civil War and they talk about the Lost Cause myth and saying that the South did not fight for slavery but rather for state rights, you have to stop and think, is this really what they fought for? Or are you just simply looking at it through the lens of a 21st century person? You gotta step back a little bit and put yourself in the perspectives of someone of the time period and ask, what was the causes for secession and ultimately the Civil War? Thank you for your time.